Hey there, fellow gardener. Welcome to my January garden guide, which gives you ideas on all of the things that you can either start from seed or transplant right now. January is a critical month of planning and starting your spring garden for those of you with last average spring frost dates in January, February, or March. If that's you, it's time to start sowing seeds because some of these crops, which I will list out in this video, take about 2 to 3 months to be ready for transplanting. So if you want the earliest start on your spring garden, which also means more time for plants to produce and for you to harvest, then you need to get started right now. If you're new here, hello and welcome. My name is Jara and I teach people how to garden and grow food. This video is one of many gardening guides that can be found on my channel where I share my knowledge about growing food and other edible plants. So make sure you subscribe to my channel if you want to develop your gardening skills. Now I know planting things in January might seem crazy to you, but it's only crazy if you're in a northern state with temperate climates and actual seasons. Gardeners in the south portions of the United States have very mild winters with barely any spring. It just goes from warm to hot. I am starting this garden guide with the crops that can be planted outdoors right now, and then we will get into all of the things that should be started indoors, primarily your warm weather crops, because it's too cold to grow them outside. I know some of you can't start seeds indoors, so I'll provide a few ideas on how to keep seedlings warm while growing them outside. Lastly, I end this guide with important garden tasks, tips, and reminders for the month of January. Let's start with all the things that can be planted outside or direct sowed right now in the month of January. And this is more applicable to garden zones 8 and up. January is basically the last chance to hurry up and plant things in the allium family like onions and leeks. It is too late to just get started with sowing onions and leeks from seed, so use transplants instead. This year I started all of my onions and leeks from seed way back in August because they take a solid 2 to 3 months to be ready. I started planting them into the garden in October and November. That's my ideal target date, but you still have time to plant some in December and January. The number one tip I can give about growing onions is to make sure you select the correct day length cultivar for your area. Onions are labeled as short day, long day, and intermediate day. Google short day onion maps to look at a color-coded map of the United States and figure out what kind you should be growing in your area. If you're located in the southern parts of the United States, zones 8 and up, you're probably going to have to grow short day onion cultivars like me. Unlike onions and leeks, chives can be started from seed right now. Just direct sow them around the garden. If you need step-by-step directions on planting and growing onions, check out my onion growing guide, which I will link in the description below. By the way, I probably have a dedicated growing guide on the majority of the crops I'm mentioning in this video. My grow guides are basically everything you need to know about growing a particular plant or crop, from selecting the best cultivar for your garden, when to plant it, and how to take care of the plant so you have a nice harvest. If one exists, I will link it below in the description so you can easily find it. Next up, we have potatoes. Garden zones 8 and 10 can still plant some seed potatoes. I'm zone 10A, and I find that when I plant them in February or beyond, it's just too late. The heat arrives early and the potato plants really struggle. It causes them to die back earlier than I would like, which means you have to harvest them before the tubers really bulk up and get big in size. This time I planted mine in November, that way they have several months in a row of cooler weather to grow properly. So that is why I say January is the last chance to plant some. Zone 8 people can continue planting into February too. Potatoes are very susceptible to pests and diseases, so I recommend early maturing cultivars. Grow them early and harvest them out fast. I like to grow mine in grow bags because it's just easier for me to control the vines, and then I just kick the bag over at harvest time. Take advantage of the cooler weather to plant lots of greens, like all of these right here. I'll just list them out for you. A couple weeks ago, I had empty bare space in here, so then I just took a bunch of blood meal, sprinkled it all over the soil, and gently raked it in with a little hand rake. Blood meal is by far the best fertilizer for anything that you're growing to eat its leafy greens. It just promotes lots of lush leafy green growth and intense color. I say it all the time when I tell you guys to plant some greens. Make sure you use some blood meal. If you're transplanting your greens, then add some blood meal into the planting hole. But seriously, the easiest thing to do is just to direct sow seeds for them. This is a bunch of lettuce right here. This is bronze mignonette, and I kind of sprinkled the seeds densely in here, but man, are they just growing wonderfully. And personally, I really like the loose leaf kind of lettuces, because then you don't need to harvest the whole thing when it starts producing a head, like maybe a butterhead or romaine, something like that. You just harvest individual leaves as needed. That means I kind of get a lot more harvest out of them. So if you're doing that, it's okay to kind of plant them really densely. I scattered a whole bunch of seeds. I did not thin them out, nothing. They're growing kind of crowded, but that's totally okay. That addition of blood meal is all that they need to get them through the growing season. And speaking of greens, the next set of crops that I recommend for you to start planting right now in January are herbs, all sorts of herbs. Here's a whole bunch of ideas for you. I plant these every year, and I almost can grow them year-round here in Florida. What really kills off the majority of my crops and the herbs is actually the summer heat, not the cold. It's like the opposite of everyone else in a state north of us. I start planting up as many herbs as I possibly can in fall, winter, and spring. Once it starts getting too hot, they just really start declining. But what helps is planting your herbs in containers or grow bags, something like that, so that if it does get too hot, you can kind of move them into a spot that gets some afternoon shade, and that will really give those plants a little bit of relief from the heat. By doing that, I have extended the life of tons of my herbs, and actually the majority of herbs are perennial, as long as the plants are healthy and survive in your garden, don't get killed off by the heat or the cold or some kind of pest or disease. And lastly, a lot of these herbs are actually host plants for various types of butterfly caterpillars, so please plant extra herbs, way more than what you think you need for your own personal use in the kitchen, so that way it's okay to sacrifice a few of them to the butterfly caterpillars. Speaking about butterflies, it's also a really great idea if you get started on the flowers that you want to grow for this next season. It is still a little bit too cold outside to just direct sow seeds for flowers, because even me here in Orlando, Florida, zone 10A, I'm still expecting at least 1, maybe 2 cold fronts that will drop between the 40s, maybe even low 30s, and that will definitely kill off any kind of flower seedlings you may have growing. But instead, I like to get these 72 cell seed trays, and I just start sowing seeds for rows and rows of all sorts of different flowers that are beneficial for the butterflies and other pollinators. Some of my favorites is actually these nasturtiums right here. These flowers are really beautiful and they're edible. They attract tons of beneficial insects to your garden. They have a delicious peppery flavor, kind of reminiscent of mustard greens or radicchio. I also really love to grow sunflowers, zinnias, and tithonia, which is this orange flower right here. All of those flowers attract so many butterflies and bees to my garden. If you don't want to be sowing tons of seeds for them and keeping them warm indoors and that sort of thing, then it's totally okay to direct sow seeds as soon as your last average spring frost date has passed. All right, so on to the next crop. Everyone in zones 8 and up can start direct sowing seeds for carrots. I have better success with the heat-tolerant varieties like Carota or Cosmic Purple. Danvers is an old heirloom variety that always grows really well for me too. If you want to harvest big carrots, then they need full sun to harvest adequate energy to produce a big carrot root, and loose soil on the sandy side. You can start harvesting at about 3 months, but I find that they're still too small for my liking, so I like to wait until they're about 4 or 5 months old. Pull one out around the 4-month mark and check. If it's too small, leave them in for another 3 to 4 weeks. It is too late to start growing large heading types of brassicas like broccoli, cabbage, and cauliflower. They need a solid 3 months to get to transplant size from seed, and then about another 2 to 4 months of growing time after being transplanted to be ready for harvest. So if you were to plant some right now, they would be forming their heads during a time of hot weather. If it's too hot, heading brassicas bolt or start flowering instead of producing a nice large crown of broccoli. You can eat the flowers, but that's not what you grow it for. This is why I'm drawing the line right now in January and say it's too late for southern gardeners to plant some. But we all can plant non-heading types of brassicas or brassicas grown to eat their leaves, like these right here. Direct sow seeds, spacing them about 1 foot apart. You can also continue direct sowing seeds for radish, beets, and turnips. Radish are a quick crop. I succession sow more seeds about every 4 weeks or so. Radishes are said to be ready for harvest in about 30 days. Realistically though, it takes me an additional 3 to maybe 4 weeks until they size up to where I like them. I tell you that so you don't worry if your radishes are still too small after 30 days. Just give them some more time. They grow easily in small spaces, grow bags, or vertical garden towers like a green stalk garden tower. All right guys, the next crop I have for you are sweet potatoes. This is my sweet potato patch. I'm actually growing them in grow bags because again, it's just way easier to just throw the bag over at harvest time. I planted these like in June, so they've been in here for like 6 months. They are definitely ready for me to harvest. Before I decide to harvest everything, I decided to take a bunch of cuttings because it's so much easier and quicker to make your own sweet potato slips from existing plants than to go to the grocery store, get a tuber, sprout the tuber. Then you have to cut off each individual sprout, put them in water, and root them to make your slips. That whole process can take like 3 months. If you want to grow sweet potatoes this spring and you have to start from a tuber, you need to get started doing that whole process right now so the slips are ready for you in about 2 to 3 months. Since I already have existing plants and I took my little cuttings like this, I just get some old mason jars and stick them in some water. They literally root in like 2 weeks, so that's drastically faster than starting all the way from a tuber. If you don't have any existing plants already in your garden, ask around, ask some friends, go on Facebook and garden groups and ask if anyone has any that they'd be willing to share with you. I am in process of shooting a sweet potato guide that will show you everything you need to know about growing sweet potatoes. If you're in the southern parts of the United States, this is definitely a crop that you need to be growing every year. And pretty much all sweet potato varieties are ready for harvest. People say around 90 to maybe like 110 days. But quite honestly, I find when I dig those up, they're still kind of too small for my liking. So I just leave them, sometimes up to 6 months like these right here. That way I can ensure that those tubers are nice and big and really worth the effort of digging them all out and curing them in that whole process. But if you're a cold climate gardener and you literally might only have 3 months to grow sweet potatoes, then it is what it is. Harvest them out before your first winter frost. These next set of crops I'm about to mention is just for zone 8 gardeners to continue planting. Everyone else in zones 9 and above are just too late in my opinion. Zone 8 stays cold much longer than zone 9 and up, so they have some extra time to continue planting crops that enjoy cooler weather. Zone 8 gardeners, hurry up and transplant strawberry bare roots. There are certain cultivars that are best for growing in the south, so be very careful and do your research to make sure you're purchasing the best kind for your garden. I highly recommend that you purchase crowns from local or native nurseries that would carry the kind that grows well in your state. Do not grow them from seed because that takes a very long time and you will miss your last chance to plant some before the heat of spring or summer returns. It's the heat that kills off my strawberry plants, at least for us southern gardeners, not the cold. I wish I had more time to plant this next crop, but alas, my chance has passed. Zone 8 gardeners can direct sow seeds for all sorts of peas. I find that growing peas is totally worth it. Peas have a higher sugar content, which makes them taste very sweet. The sugar content quickly degrades once harvested, so the ones you get at the grocery store have lost a lot of their sugar by the time you buy and then eat them. There is a huge difference when you grow them yourself and eat them fresh while all of their sugar content is still intact. Plus, they are super easy to grow. Just direct sow seeds, grow them up a trellis, keep the soil moist, and harvest in about 2.5 months. The standard green pea is awesome. I always have success with Oregon Sugar Pod 2 or Green Arrow, but it's super fun to grow the more unique colored peas like Golden Sweet Yellow Snow Peas or Royal Snow, which is almost black in color. Just very striking. Being able to grow unique colors of my favorite veggies is part of what makes gardening fun for me. I do have seeds on my website if you want to try growing these varieties too. Lastly, I have some ideas for those of you that barely have a winter or some sort of a frost. Like those of you in South Florida, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, or those of you with last spring frost dates that fall right now in January. You guys can start direct sowing seeds for all of these crops right here. If you happen to get some cold fronts with temperatures below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, you might have to cover tender seedlings or they can die. I like to cut the bottom off from some milk jugs and flip them over on my small seedlings to create a little mini greenhouse, or you can flip cardboard boxes over them and secure them with some long landscape hooks. Okay, so that's all of the things that you can start from seed or transplant right now. Let's discuss spring gardening, because if your last spring frost date is in January, February, or March, you need to start sowing seeds right now. The majority of these things are warm season crops and they do not like the cold. So if it's cold outside, you will have to either sow them indoors or create a warm environment for them by sowing seeds in a greenhouse type of thing. If you sow seeds for warm weather crops in cold soil, they will have very poor germination. And if they do manage to germinate, they grow very slowly because they need warmth to take off. Also, as soon as something germinates, it needs a bright light source to help them grow. I often find that a sunny window is just not enough, especially for light-hungry plants like peppers and tomatoes. To be successful sowing seeds right now, you need 1, warmth, and 2, very bright light. There are a few more things that help seedlings germinate and grow quickly, but I would say warmth and light are probably the most important. There are so many ways that you can create a warm and bright light type of environment. I use heat mats to keep the soil and plants warm, and then I use 5000 K or higher shop lights or grow lights to provide a lot of light. I used to sow seeds indoors, but now I'm sowing them outdoors in mini greenhouses that I get from Amazon, or I just cover my outdoor shelving units with plastic, like wrap the whole unit. I place a few heat mats inside and just close the whole thing up. It keeps all of my plants and seedlings nice and warm, even on the coldest winter nights. I will link in the description below to all of these supplies, and I'll also link to my How to Sow Seeds guide. It shows you my whole setup and tips on how to get good seed germination from the perspective of a professional seed and plant nursery. So take these expert tips and apply them at home. Okay, so back to the things that need to be sowed indoors this month. First up, we have peppers and eggplants, which take about 3 months to be ready for transplant. They take forever, so try to use heat bats and bright light sources to help them grow faster. Also, fertilize with a liquid fertilizer at half the strength to get them up to size once the first set of true leaves appears. Next up, we have my favorite crop, which is tomatoes. They take around 2 months to be ready for transplanting from seed. They grow much faster than peppers and eggplants, but they do require warm soil, bright light, and fertilizer to grow to their best. I start transplanting my spring tomato crop towards the end of January. I expect another 1, maybe 2 cold fronts. When that happens, I cover the seedlings with old sheets, plastic containers, milk jugs, etc. And then they're just fine. If you're not able to protect cold-sensitive tomato seedlings, then plant them after all danger of frost has passed. The goal for me is to grow tomatoes early and quickly, so I harvest it all out before June, when summer heat and rain prevent them from producing and basically kill off my tomato plants. And trust me, by this point, I have harvested a ton of tomatoes. This right here and behind me are my rows and rows of my fall tomatoes. Yes, fall tomatoes. These were planted in September, but since I'm in Florida, these things grow really well during fall, winter, and spring. It just doesn't really get cold enough to kill off a mature tomato plant. It definitely can kill off little seedlings. But these things will survive as long as some pest or disease don't take them out all the way to June. So that's an extremely long growing period. That's like 9 months in a row. Now they're catching all sorts of diseases. I really need to get caught up with using my hydrogen peroxide spray that I love so much and just fertilize them to put on new healthy green growth. And some of you have been sending me emails or like tagging me in your pictures of the tomatoes that you're growing in your garden from seeds from my website. And I have to say, I am so impressed. A lot of you have plants that look better than mine. You've really taken my advice to heart and stayed on top of the spraying and just taking care of your plants. And that's just the coolest feeling to know that my advice is really helping some of you be successful in your gardens. Now, since we're all planting our spring tomato crops, I'm being asked a lot, which ones do I recommend that are like the most heat tolerant? And the best advice I can give you for any kind of veggie crop is that the darker colored versions of that vegetable tend to be more heat tolerant. So like with tomatoes, I mean, the standard red tomato, is okay. But if you plant the purple or black cultivars, for example, Paul Robeson, Japanese Trifle, Black Beauty, they do seem to just last a little bit longer than the rest of the tomato cultivars in my garden once the heat starts coming. But I'm in zone 10A. It gets so hot eventually that not even the most heat tolerant tomato plant makes it in my garden. I'm also being asked, like, in general, what are some of my favorites production wise? I primarily grow just heirloom tomatoes, and I have tried growing hybrids that are said to be very productive, and quite honestly, I don't find that much of a difference. My heirlooms still produce really well. If I had to just recommend 3 large beefsteak heirloom cultivars that are super productive, I would say 1, Owen's Purple. That's actually a cross between Paul Robeson and another cultivar. I forget what it is. So if you've ever grown Paul Robeson before, which is absolutely one of my favorites, Owen's Purple is like that one on steroids. The tomatoes are consistently more large and it just produces way more than Paul Robeson. I also recommend Tex Wine, which is a nice, beautiful red standard beefsteak tomato, just super, super prolific. And lastly, I recommend Triple L crop, also called the Italian tree tomato, if you have the space, because that one literally is a mini tree by the end of my growing season. Those vines get like 25 feet long. I've seen people grow them up trees. I personally grow mine up a 10-foot tall T-post and just kind of wrap it and tie it around that T-post as the growing season progresses. Super productive, and it produces loads of red beefsteak tomatoes. And I do have seeds for all 3 of those on my website if you want to try growing them this season. Next up, we have loofah, moringa, and other edible gourds like snake beans or bitter melon. These crops require a minimum of about 6 months in a row of warm temperatures to grow and be ready for harvest. So it is very advantageous, especially if you're in a colder climate, to start them from seed indoors to get a jump start on your growing season. Sow seeds indoors in large solo cups 2 months before your last spring frost date and transplant them as soon as all danger of frost has passed. These are tropical plants, so they are very sensitive to the cold. Starting seeds for loofah and moringa can be a little bit tricky because they have a hard shell. Growing them in warm soil and high humidity is key key to speed up the germination process. If your last spring frost date is in January, you can direct sow seeds for corn or beans right now. If not, let's say it lands in February like me or in March, then you can get a head start by sowing seeds indoors. Yes, you heard me right. You can sow seeds for corn and beans in containers. It doesn't always have to be direct sown. But the trick is to transplant them at the 3-week mark, no later than that, or they will be root bound and it will stunt their growth. Plan to sow seeds 3 weeks before your last spring frost date. I like to grow them in these 72 cell seed trays, basically making my own plug. At the 3-week mark, I pop the plug out. Usually the root system is just developed enough that the soil doesn't fall apart, it stays together, and I don't disturb the roots. This is a great technique to get a 3-week head start on your corn and bean crops, or if you have critters digging out the seeds when you direct sow them. My last tip about growing corn specifically is that most likely you will get the corn earworm. They are brown and they have 2 little black dots on their head that makes it look like little eyes. They are very tough worms. In Florida, there is no such thing as a small worm infestation, so if you get worms, be prepared. Have some spinosad in stock at home. I would say battling the corn earworm is the most common issue that other gardeners report back to me when trying to grow sweet corn. Other types of corn like dent and field corn are not as susceptible to the worms like sweet corn varieties in general. Okay, let's discuss the last set of crops that need to be started from seeds indoors if you want to get a head start on your spring and summer season. Things like these crops right here. Now let me just say, I grow my spring and summer crops together in spring, and then in April and May, I start planting the super tropical, extra heat tolerant crops that will produce for me through summer. Summer is jungle gardening for me here in Florida. I have much more success growing traditional summer or warm weather crops like melons, tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers in the spring while temperatures, pests, and disease pressure is down. Here are a bunch of things I grow during my summer, just to give you guys some ideas and foresight into what to plant at the end of spring and early summer. The good thing is that most of these crops tend to be very high producing and aren't too needy like your traditional veggie crops. I also rely heavily on perennial edibles and tropical fruits like pineapples, mangoes, Barbados cherry, and muscadine grapes that produce during the summer, and super heat tolerant versions of our favorite veggie crops like Thai lavender frog eggplant, Everglades tomatoes, and yard-long beans. I will be making a best crops or heat tolerant substitutions to grow in hot climates during the summer video very soon, so make sure you're subscribed to my channel, that way you get notified of when that video goes live. All right, hopefully that gave you a lot of ideas for things you need to start growing in January. I can't stress enough to get an early start and plan your spring gardens right now to guarantee a huge harvest. Lastly, let's discuss important garden tasks and reminders for the month of January. Be ready to cover plants when cold fronts arrive. I just got some row cover hoops from Amazon to basically make a long covered garden bed to protect my tomato seedlings that I'm planting at the end of January. I also got a few zip up fruit tree frost bags to protect some of my most tropical fruit trees or my Carrie mango tree, which is flowering right now. It's a little early than what I would like, which is bad because if we get temperatures below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, it damages the flowers and then no mangoes form. To prevent cold damage on my mango tree and others, I run an extension cord out, hang a heat mat in the middle of the tree, and zip the frost protection bag shut. It keeps everything nice and toasty even on cold nights. And I will link in the description below to these supplies if you want to find them. If you're concerned that cold weather will kill some of your favorite plants, it's a great idea to take cuttings, propagate them indoors during the winter, and then plant them back outside in spring. I especially love to take new cuttings for all of my herbs and tomato plants, for example, so I don't have to start them all the way from seed again. Since it's nice and cool outside, it's a good time to mulch the garden, get caught up on garden projects, weeding, building new beds, etc. Right now, I'm painting my chicken coop, which, by the way, I'm planning a How to Get Started Raising Backyard Chickens series this spring, so stay tuned. January is also a great time to prune dormant fruiting plants and trees that fruit on new wood. This is super important. If you don't know which of your fruit trees and plants fruit on new wood, do some research. For example, my muscadine grapevines fruit on new wood or growth. Whatever new branches and vines it grows this spring will flower and produce fruit that I harvest this summer. So now is a great time to prune these plants to stimulate lots of new healthy green growth in spring. Also, if you're growing asparagus in warm winter climates, and yes, you can grow asparagus even in Florida, you have to cut down the entire plant, all of the stems down to the ground. This triggers asparagus plants to start sending up new shoots in the spring, which is the part you harvest and eat. So prune, mulch, and fertilize your asparagus plants. It's also a great time to spray fruit trees with horticultural oil to smother out various diseases and pests so you have less incidence of them next year in spring when all of these things get active again. For example, if you get leaf miners on your plants, horticultural oil will smother them out so you have less of them next year. It's too hot during most of the year for me here in Florida to spray with anything oil-based, including neem oil, because it can and has burned my plants. So I wait for fall and winter to apply oil-based treatments. Lastly, I wanted to make you aware of my upcoming live garden classes that I do right here on YouTube. Mark your calendars because on Sunday, January 21st, I will be teaching about planting heirloom tomatoes, and on Sunday, February 25th, I will be teaching about raising backyard chickens with a tour of my coop and setup. These live garden classes are a lot of fun. I really enjoy talking to you guys and answering your questions in real time. Make sure you subscribe to my channel, that way you get notified of when I go live for those classes. You can find a copy of this January guide, like in text format, in the monthly gardening guide section on my website so that you can save, print, copy, or share it. Or if you prefer, you can join my email group. There's a link down below in the description, and I'll send it to you automatically at the start of each month. It's also how I send the schedule of my upcoming live garden classes. Well, I hope you like this list I put together for January, and it inspires you all to get an early start on your spring gardens. If I missed any seed or plant ideas, feel free to drop a comment below. If you enjoyed this video, a big thumbs up would mean a lot to me, and it helps my channel out more than you know. Thank you for watching, and happy gardening.